I love owners that say, here's my goal. I want to buy a house in the Smoky Mountains and it's going to cost me 800,000. And over the next 20 years, I just want to supplement the cost. I don't need to break even.
Yeah.
And I would say, God bless you, because they're realistic and that very intelligent. Because over the course of the year, if they're making $85,000 to $125,000 and that's coming from somewhere else down the road, that's huge.
Welcome to RevLabs by PriceLabs.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the RevLabs podcast, where we understand your unique revenue management challenges and bring you concrete advice and true stories to help you, the leaders of the short-term rental industry, navigate the complexities of revenue management and changing market trends with confidence. My name is Becca. I'll be your host today. For those of you who might not know me, I lead the U.S. Solutions team at PriceLabs. I've worked with hundreds of operators, just like our guests today, and I also have a unique perspective coming from the industry myself. I was once a director here in Charleston of one of our local vacation rental companies. But enough about me. Today, we're talking with Randy Jensen, a very accomplished and super sharp revenue analyst with Grand Welcome. Randy, care to introduce yourself and share a little bit about Grand Welcome?
Becca, thank you for the introduction. Yes, my background in aviation started in college. The degrees in aviation business administration, and in one of the classes, several of the classes learned about the subject of seat control and capacity management, as it was called back then. I had my pilot's license, but at the time I started thinking about maybe going towards the corporate side of the airlines. And it was not long after deregulation, which ages me. But it was a real exciting time, and it's kind of where it started for me. Worked in the airlines for many years at American, pricing and revenue management. In Arizona, we have quite a hospitality industry, which I've worked in quite a bit, and furnished corporate housing, and now the vacation rental side.
Cool. And talk to me a little bit about Grand Welcome for those who might not know who Grand Welcome is. What markets are you in? How many listings y'all manage? And do you have a specific market that you're in charge of?
Sure. Yes, Grand Welcome is a fantastic company that started out just managing a few properties here and added a few properties, and it has grown to a very large scale management company. Its unique characteristic, it is a franchise model. And we have a few corporate markets and franchise models. Don't know the exact number of properties. It's well over 2,000 markets across the country. I have Branson and other markets in Missouri. I've got Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Utah. We split the world in half between the Analyst at Grand Welcome, and we do all the support for pricing and revenue management for the different markets.
That's awesome. So it's crazy. At PriceLabs, we always sort of talk about trying to find like common threads to manage at scale, but being across so many different markets, I have to imagine it's also tricky to understand the nuances of each of them, right?
You know, it is, I guess tricky could be a word. It is tricky, but if you look at the data, you look at the information, it all kind of makes sense after a while. Seasonality, all the different nuances you can kind of figure out, and kind of makes a lot of fun of it. It's not like every market you're doing a Scottsdale, Arizona market where from October to April you're busy and the rest of the year you're not. I mean, if you have all kinds of different markets going on at different times, it's great, because also it gives you a reprieve. If you're like right now, I'm looking forward through the end of March of next year for my Scottsdale market, because this is our peak booking time and our peak demand, where I have other markets where now we're going into our slow season. So it's kind of like fifth gear all the time.
I love it. So something that you mentioned right at the beginning when you introduced yourself, I think maybe could have thrown off a couple of our listeners. You said, "Oh, I got my background in aviation," and we were talking about this before we started recording, and I would love to sort of bring this into the conversation. You had asked me a question: where does revenue management come from? And I think that this is a really important question because we hear about it in hotels, and we are hearing more and more about it. It's part of why we're doing this podcast, is because we're trying to professionalize revenue management in this industry, in short-term rentals. But talk to me a little bit about your experience in revenue management and sort of how you've seen it develop over the years.
Sure. The airlines for many, many years were regulated by the government. The government said, here's when you can fly, where you can fly, and how much you could charge. And in the middle and later 70s, there were studies done on, could the industry be more competitive? Could it be better for the consumer? Could it be better for the individual markets if it was deregulated? Meaning, if it became an open market. And with an open market, there's more competition. You get to choose your routes, you get to choose your frequency, you also get to choose your pricing, and all of that goes with it. So there comes along the Airline Deregulation Act. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, you saw a very large growth in small airlines, regional airlines, and they were able to basically run their business models as they wanted. I was very fortunate. In the college that I went to, I had heard about this study that was done by Boeing Aircraft. And they had a real basic thought that if we could do a study and really learn about this process to where an airline could better manage their rates and inventory, they would make more money and buy more airplanes. Pretty simple. I still have the study to this day, and it's fascinating. And this was done in 1980. And every single thing in that study still applies today, how to manage rates and inventory. But it even goes deeper, I believe, than some of what we're looking at today, because it goes into the type of buyer, the buyer behavior. It talks about stimulated demand. It talks about unconstrained demand. It talks about diluted revenue. There's so much that, I mean, you can screw up. If there's 10 things to do revenue management, you can screw it up 8 ways real quick. And it's just a fascinating study, but it pretty much applies in any type of a business that you're in. Airlines, hotels, restaurants, look at movie theaters. You know, they all have revenue management practices.
Yeah. So one thing that you actually just said kind of just like made a light bulb go off in my head. And it's basically you're saying that the airlines more or less went from almost flat rate models to using data to not only improve their own, I guess you could sort of use occupancy as as sort of
Load factor,
a translated
load factor, load factor,
load
and airline.
factor,
Yep.
occupancy. But I'm starting to see all these parallels between the short-term rental industry and how sort of we're developing right now, and sort of what happened with the airlines, which I think, I don't know, the way that you've just put a bow on it, I think is really incredible.
It's all very similar. And the airlines, being that, you know, each airline that was out there at the time were doing in excess of, you know, $3 and $4 billion a year. It was a big item. If you could, they measure revenue by tenths of pennies per mile per person. That's what they drill it down to. And revenue per available seat mile, RASM. And if you can change either the RASM, the revenue per available seat mile, either by rate or by load factor, just a fraction of a point in a given month, it can be significant amounts of money. But then, like I said earlier too, if you don't do it correctly, or you don't do it, same with the big, you know, it can be financially devastating. It's
Yeah, it's just to kind of pull back and sort of find those through lines again. Sounds like RESM would sort of be like RevPAR
Yep.
in our industry. So same thing, you're balancing your occupancy, you're balancing your rates, you're trying to understand the market and the demand, and always improving that number. So I think that's very, very cool.
The thing that the airlines probably, in addition to, like, when an airline adds a flight in 340 days from now from Chicago to New York, it knows before that plane goes live, 330 days, it knows how much demand that particular airplane has because it's got all these years of data. The vacation rental industry, we don't. And then for as long as the vacation rental industry has been around, we've had a bunch of screwy years in the middle of it. So our data is really not like an airline, obviously, or a hotel, but it has to make us even be more cognizant that you've got to be right on as far as if you think demand is going to be X, it better be, because if demand comes in a little bit below, then obviously if the demand goes to somebody else or it doesn't come in, it can be devastating. So you just have to be very careful. I happen to be here on the lower risk side. If I book a couple extra nights at $10 below what maybe the market's doing, over time, that occupancy is going to be more valuable than a few dollars in rate. Vacancy is devastating. If you're denying demand because of rate, devastating. There's all kinds, like I say, ways to make mistakes, but it's what keeps it interesting and keeps it fun.
Keeps it fun, yeah. So kind of drilling down into sort of your day to day, what does that look like? What data are you looking at? What changes are you making? Because it sounds, you've got a lot on your plate, a lot of different markets. We talked a little bit about the different booking windows that you're paying attention to, but what does a day in the life of Randy look like?
It's kind of the way I've been doing it for a long time. I take a look at what initial efforts in my beginning of the day will make the biggest impact on revenue. For example, today I got up, I pulled up PriceLab, and I went in and I pulled up the market, and I've got all my headers, and I can take a look at what properties have been the most productive in the last 21 days or the last 14 days. What's been booking? Because if these properties are booking, I can go in and say, yeah, that property is this or that property is that. And I want to take a look out maybe till the end of the year, maybe even go into March, especially if it's a market like Scottsdale. If I'm getting some bookings and things are happening in October, November, in Scottsdale, I want to take a look at what's going on February and March. I sure don't want to sell the Phoenix Open sheet. So I want to prioritize my initial efforts where the biggest bang for the buck will be. So that's one of the ways that I do it. I'm not going to go in and worry about one-bedroom condos in Branson the week after Thanksgiving because there's very low demand there. I want to put my efforts where we are right away. That's going to give us the biggest return. But that being said, I believe anybody can get $499 a night in Chicago when Taylor Swift is coming to town. That's easy. Going back to my first days in the airlines, I always liked it trying to figure what can we take the marginal markets, the dog markets. Like when I first started, I got Omaha, Lincoln, and Sioux City. You couldn't hurt the markets. They were just weak markets. But what can you do to possibly stimulate some demand? And stimulating is from the Boeing study. What can I do to stimulate it? In the vacation industry, I think sometimes we don't look at the corporate and we don't look at the business. We don't look at the medical. We don't look at the relocation. We don't look at the sports. We don't look at all those different, we call it mix of sales. Who's your customer? So I also like to figure out if people are asleep at the wheel pricing their weekdays in Austin, Texas, I want to have some pretty aggressive weekday stays for the properties that would be good for corporate. We've gotten a couple of Yeti customers that have just been out there looking for a place to go. And then they say, hey, I'm a Yeti person and I want this, this, or this. And then that snowballs. And then you get another Yeti person and all of a sudden you start booking your weekdays. Or
Yeah.
I've sent messages through LinkedIn to HR people at Vanderbilt Medical in Nashville saying, hey, we got 13 properties within 6 blocks of Vandy Medical. If you have, and this was like during COVID when they were bringing in doctors and doing, we had all kinds of, and it was all weekday.
That's
So
incredible.
in addition to going at where the highest money is, where can you go find money, or where my efforts kind of lead me in a given day?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I forget who I was speaking to recently, but they were basically saying the past few years. So I've been with PriceLabs for 3 years now, and when I first started, I remember going to conferences and people saying, "Oh, revenue management. Do you do accounting?" And we were like, "No, it's not accounting. It's something completely different." And we've seen this sort of evolution happening where people are more aware, but we've also been in very good times thus far. Since like post 2020, I think that there's been a really big boom in the industry. So a lot of the new revenue managers coming into the industry are operating in good times on those Taylor Swift tour days. Do you have any sort of advice for, potential downturns? Like where I love that you are looking at sort of unique um, opportunities for who's coming to stay at your homes, but are there any certain like KPIs or anything that you're like, I'm paying attention to this and this is a signal that things aren't going the way that they've been in years past, and this is, time for me to make some changes?
There's a lot of things to look at. I look at basically what's going on in the economy, and I have gone through numerous Super Bowls, Gulf War, 9/11. Like I said, Taylor Swift in a couple markets. I've gone through all these different scenarios. COVID is a good example. I just started literally with a vacation rental company here, and 2 weeks later, COVID started. And we had been a short-term vacation rental company, and we met and talked, and we were like, I had just left corporate housing, which was 10-day minimum, mostly long-term. So we shifted our pricing strategy to midterm, and we did great in 2020. Had a lot of doctors coming in town. We had a lot of doctors. We had people getting out of New York because it was a hot spot. A lot of wealthy people just doing. So just watching what's going on in the world, what's going on in the economy, um, understanding risk from all the people that have the properties. I'm not a high risk person. I'm a low risk person. If I'm going to make an error, I'm going to fill a place up before I try to go after rate. Watching what's going on with consumer debt, watching just what's going on in the news, and watch what's going on with spending. Recent news has talked about people are thinking that going out to eat is a luxury item. Well, yeah, it could be, but if that's a luxury item, what's traveling? That's uber luxury. And if something's going to go, you better be in the right spot to make sure that if there is demand out there, you don't deny any of it.
Exactly. And sometimes that can mean sometimes hard owner conversations because, an owner may have bought a house in 2020 and seen those revenues and those ADRs that they were getting, and then not have the access to the data. So, do you have any advice for talking to owners from a revenue management position to set expectations or?
It's you were absolutely right, and especially for those that have bought houses in the last 5 years at retail. Um, the first question that I would ask an owner is, what's your goal? I had this conversation literally last week with another colleague, and I have gotten inquiries for doing projections. One person from Palm Springs said he wanted to buy a 2-bedroom condo, and with the proceeds from it, wanted to send his kid to college. And I'm like, okay, what kind of college is he going to? But I've worked with and have personally have and still have investment properties where my initial goal is to break even and make a little bit of money. In Arizona, if you buy a house and have it for 5 years, if you're not making 30%, you did something wrong, because they're always, and I've been here a long time, but knowing what the goal is, and I love owners that say, here's my goal. I want to buy a house in the Smoky Mountains, and it's going to cost me 800,000, and over the next 20 years, I just want to supplement the cost. I don't need to break even.
Yeah.
And I would say, God bless you, because they're realistic and that very intelligent. Because over the course of the year, if they're making $85,000 to $125,000 and that's coming from somewhere else down the road, that's huge. But I've also had owners, and I don't talk to owners anymore. I've had owners say, well, my costs are higher than what I'm bringing in. And you almost want to say, well, there's no correlation between the two. Your costs are your costs, and the revenue.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
you just have to understand and be realistic about what your results are going to be at the end. And when you're going into it, you tell the owners, the house has to be absolutely. I work for Fairmont. I don't expect 5-star, 5 diamond, but if you want it to perform, it better look that well. It better look that good. And everything about it's got to be fantastic, or you're just not going to get the results that you could. And then I'll obviously understand risk. When we have owners say, I want a minimum rate, we've had a lot of it now. People will want a minimum rate Memorial Day to Labor Day. Well, the last 3 weeks prior to Labor Day in some markets, it's not summer. In Arizona, kids have been in school for a month now.
Yeah.
So for some markets, the 3 weeks before Labor Day, people think it's pandemonium and there's people running in the streets with nowhere to sleep. It's not the case. So telling owners, you know what, our goal is to work with the tools we have to make the most amount of money for you. And it works sometimes it doesn't. As far as we have owners that say, we don't care. I want this rate or I want this restriction. And that's it. And I looked at a property today. It's taken one owner booking since August 1st and has not taken a single revenue booking since August. But his owner mins are in place. Not going to happen. And all you can do is try your best.
Of course. Now, have you ever, and I'm not sure that this would necessarily be up to you, but have you ever fired owners? Because that was something that my old company didn't do too often, but every once in a while, if if there was somebody that's taking up 90% of your time, the listing isn't up to par, they have unrealistic expectations, have you ever had to navigate one of those conversations?
I've supplied data. I have supplied the data for those who have done that, yes. And I would not probably participate in the actual conversation, but I've also supplied enough information, because when you do make that call and when you do make that decision, and I can name probably a half a dozen properties by name right now where the markets don't want them, but I've supplied information to them. The challenging ones are the ones that they want something more, and you look at their RevPAR performance and they're killing it, but in their mind they want more. Their RevPAR is $82 and the market's 60. They want more. They want more, or they tell you to do this or tell you to do that. That's just old-fashioned greed, and that's unfortunate. But I've only supplied data. I won't be in part of the calls to off an owner.
That's a better position to be in, I think. So one of the questions that we were talking about before, with the market changing, what do you think the biggest challenge for revenue managers is today?
Boy, there's probably a long list of
I know,
them.
it's a
You know
very
what?
broad
I think the
question.
biggest, at the end of the day, always the biggest challenge is managing how much demand are we going to have? What is our demand going to be? And understanding demand. And that is a big challenge. And it's very difficult. So this year, we're in an election year. Consumer debt per individual is the highest it's ever been as long as they've tracked it. We've got high interest rates. We got issues going on in the world in terms of wars, Middle East, Ukraine, Russia. It's kind of a bit of a mess overall. And if I'm going to say demand will be average, above or below, I'm going to shoot and hope it's below as far as, and it comes to what I plan for. And if you're wrong and you think it's going to be average or better demand, or if you're wrong in anything, it's going to be a problem. But I think understanding the demand is going to be the big one. And then what's going on with consumer and debt. Last 5 years, a lot of people have been paying for their travels on credit, and that's kind of dried up. Granted, not everybody does, but you've got to be able to understand who your audience is, and you take a look at some of these companies that are going out of business or reducing locations, and all these are all indicators.
Yeah.
If you see, companies like Target laying off, well, they're a consumer demand driven company, and again, they got some real smart people there. What did the travel industry have to be prepared for? But at the end of the day, I think I probably helped companies or owners more by being a little bit more conservative and taking a conservative route and just putting in respectable base business. Maybe you can stimulate a little bit with rate and go from there.
Yeah. Considering some of the market factors, the macro stuff that you were just mentioning, do you think that there are certain segments or even specific markets that might not be as affected or might overperform compared to, other segments that might be more affected by these things?
That's a phenomenal question, Becca. That's a great question. I had this conversation too the other day. I love the retired and semi-retired people because they're gonna be stimulated by price and value, and they don't want to be at the airports on a Thursday and a Friday, or they may drive. So the leisure, the pure leisure, Sunday through Thursday, I don't know if they're going to be as affected because they don't have to pay the peak rates, or they don't have. So I think that's not going to be affected. Corporate. And I worked for a corporate housing company, a global corporate housing company out of Singapore. Corporate's not going to be as affected. Now, granted, it's been affected because of work from home and meetings and all of that kind of stuff, but corporate is not seasonal. It does not go on the weekdays. I mean, the weekends. It travels on the weekdays. So I think corporate, people still have to travel in the business world. People still have to get hotels. People still have to get and that's actually an interesting thing too. When I worked for corporate housing, all of our places were like condos and studios and townhouses all around the world. And we started delving in, when I started, into the leisure side. So then instead of staying at a Marriott, you could get a little studio with a kitchen and a little living area, because they were vacant because it was a corporate house and their weekends were vacant. So we were able to stimulate some demand for leisure. Same thing with the vacation rental industry. If you have to travel on business, why go stay at a Marriott when you can stay in a nice little vacation rental somewhere? So I think corporate's not going to be that much affected. We used to do quite a bit of business with relocation. Relocation's still going to happen. That's just the way it is. And with our younger generation relocating in the first 30 years of a person's life in today's world, a lot of these people are making job changes and location changes. Relocation, not a tremendous amount, but we used to do a lot of business with like the Diamondbacks and with the Phoenix Suns and different sports entities. That's going to happen whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
It's just who happens to be there to say, we've got places for you when you trade somebody. So other than just your weekend leisure, I think some of those segments are going to be relatively consistent.
Interesting. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to looking for your non-traditional sources and sourcing from, various entities that vacation rental managers might not have even thought would be interested. So I absolutely love that.
But in the travel world, they are just your normal. We talk quite a bit about weekday travel because there's an opportunity there, and so you've got published prices and you got unpublished prices, and your published prices are going to be what you're going to see on Airbnb. But if you have a market like Nashville and you do local negotiated agreements, LNAs, for any medical or university or whatever it might be, your competitor is looking at you at 199, but you're selling to Vanderbilt for 139 to build occupancy. A lot of people don't look at that, or they don't think about that. And we'll do corporate rates, but they're only good for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday departure. You're at 199 on the website, but you're selling them for 129 to discount higher. Those are the things that I think are really important, because you're not just dumping rate. When you take your rate from 199 to 149, everybody goes, oh, look at them. They were reaching for the sky. Now they're dumping. Well, the guy that's at 199, that's full. He's like, yeah, but I'm selling a lot of mine at unpublished. All that stuff has to be looked into, and it takes time and effort, but it works. Trust me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I think that we are just about at time. I feel like this has gone so quick. But if you had one sort of takeaway, one little snapshot soundbite to give to our audience, what would you tell them if they were coming to you and they said, Randy, how do I be an incredible revenue manager like you? I don't have aviation background and all the great experience you have. I'm just coming into this. I've maybe done this for a couple of years. What would be your advice? No pressure.
It's a great question. I always talk about understanding demand. I talk about understanding risk. If you've got an owner, or if your management company is on the risk side, understand that, and then understand that what you do is so important from the bottom line, from somebody that may be a homeowner or somebody that owns a company. It's an incredibly important facet of a company. But on the tail end of all of this, if at all possible, work extremely closely with your marketing people. Like the Boeing study talks about, if you throw out like Southwest Airlines, if you see a $59 rate out there, they're going to bombard it with marketing. Otherwise, you're just giving a bunch of $59 rates away. But if you combine marketing with revenue management, oh, the possibilities are endless.
Oh my gosh.
Go get to know your marketing person.
I feel like we could have a whole nother episode on making revenue management a part of your ecosystem.
Managing buying behavior is a riot. If you can change that person to go from March in Scottsdale to April, look at how many more people you can charge more for March and how better you're going to fill up April. Managing that behavior is a riot.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll probably have to have you back at some point.
Well, thank you so much, Becca.
Randy,
it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, Randy, always lovely. And for everybody that's listening, if you have questions, you can always reach out to us. Thank you so much. And we hope to have you all back on either another podcast or one of our live webinars. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a good one.
Thank you.